These are the most interesting historical photos and unusual objects from the past. Let's get 100,000 subscribers. British soldiers pose as a football team in front of the goal while wearing full gas masks in northern France in 1916. They trained this way so they could keep playing and moving if a gas alarm suddenly sounded near the trenches. When a powerful series of New Madrid quakes hit in 1811 and 1812, parts of the Mississippi River were seen flowing backward for several minutes. The tremors were so strong that they rang church bells on the East Coast. The excursion ship SS Eastland rolled onto its side in the Chicago River while still tied to the dock in July 1915. More than 800 passengers and crew lost their lives, making it one of the worst maritime accidents on the Great Lakes. This strange upright cabinet is a punishment stand in a Scottish police station in the late 19th century, built to hold a person completely still. It shows how normal physical discipline by the authorities once was, even inside ordinary local police building. Nicoleta Nicolescu, leader of the women's branch of the Iron Guard, leads a raised arm salute with Romanian women at a summer camp in Romania in 1935. Within a few years, she was arrested as a national security risk and died in custody as the authorities moved to break up the movement. Chang and Eng Bunker, conjoined twin brothers born in Siam in 1811, became famous while touring the world and later settled in the United States. Their shared life led doctors to use the phrase Siamese twins for this rare condition. Adolf Hitler smiles while talking with officers after hearing that the French government would seek an armistice on 17 June 1940. The fall of France left his regime dominant in Western Europe and Britain suddenly without its main continental ally. A Soviet tank tows an armored sled loaded with infantry in white winter suits during the Winter War in eastern Finland in 1939. These sleds, called Bronievolakushi, let soldiers move with the tanks over deep snow, but left them exposed to cold wind and incoming fire. Welsh policeman George Auger, known for his exceptionally tall height, poses with a very small performer and two other men for contrast in the early 1900s. His imposing look earned him a spot in Queen Victoria's escort, where she nicknamed him Captain. Church groups in California hold nighttime signs asking if young people follow the Beatles or Faith in 1966. The protest was part of a wave of rallies and record boycotts after John Lennon said the band was more popular than Jesus. In 1923, New York dance teacher Alma Cummings shows her bandaged feet and ruined shoes after waltzing for 27 hours straight at the Audubon Ballroom. Her non-stop record, set with 6 different partners, sparked a wave of dance marathons across the United States. Magician Joe Burris is lowered into a freshly dug grave as he prepares an escape act for a Halloween show in 1987. The stunt, which buried him and his acrylic casket under wet cement, later became infamous when the structure failed and rescuers could not reach him in time. Inventor George Hutton adjusts the inner machinery of his mechanical elephant, Jumbo, in 1938. The walking ride was built from metal ribs, canvas skin, and a motor so it could lumber through fairs like a real circus giant. Beachgoers watch the sea behave strangely just before a huge wall of water approaches during the Indian Ocean tsunami in 2004. Within minutes, that wave hit the shore, overturning boats and turning this calm beach into a disaster zone. Winston Churchill and Franklin Roosevelt relax with fishing rods at the U.S. presidential retreat, Camp David, in 1943. Between quiet moments like this, the two leaders planned the strategy that shaped the final years of the global conflict. A mother lies outside a basement window, reading a picture book to her 6-year-old daughter inside. The girl is kept in isolation with polio during a mid-20th century outbreak, so these window visits are the only way her mother can stay close and comfort her. Japanese special effects crews adjust a giant monster prop above a detailed scale model city while filming early Godzilla movies in the 1950s and 1960s. The entire city fit on a soundstage where actors in rubber suits could stomp through buildings that were only a few feet tall. Members of a secret hate group in the American South pose in bizarre pointed costumes and masks in 1871. Their nighttime marches and threats were aimed at scaring newly freed African Americans and their supporters away from voting and public life. American soldiers signed their names on the bare wall of the room where Adolf Hitler was born, in Braunau am Inn, Austria, in 1945. Writing their hometowns beside his birthplace turned the room into a quiet mark of defeat and a reminder of who now stood in control. Indigenous leader Twira Kayapo presses the flat of her blade against a Brazilian energy official during a tense 1989 meeting over a huge Amazon dam project. The shocking protest photo went worldwide and helped stall plans that would have flooded large areas of Kayapo land. On this balcony in Berlin in the 1930s, Adolf Hitler appears with senior officers while long party banners hang from the building. The vast crowd below raises their arms in reply, turning the square into one of the regime's most famous stage-managed scenes. An African-American family held in bondage on a plantation near Beaufort, South Carolina, poses outside their cabin in 1862. Taken during the Civil War after Union forces reached the Sea Islands. After firefighters battled a winter blaze at the Eureka Building in Chicago, thousands of gallons of water froze solid on the walls. By morning, the whole facade looked like a giant ice palace with fire escapes and windows buried under hanging icicles. A man in a suit sits on a mound of human bones in Cuba in 1896, during the war between Spain and independence fighters. Scenes like this were used to show how many civilians had died from hunger and disease in the forced camps run by the colonial authorities. Delicate glass eyes and sculpted noses are mounted on eyeglass frames in this display of early facial prosthetics for wounded soldiers after the First World War. Artists hand-painted each piece to match skin tone and eye color so veterans could walk in public without drawing curious stares. A convicted thief clings to a wooden post while townspeople look on during a public punishment in Guaymas, Mexico in 1920. Soon, a squad of soldiers would enforce the verdict, showing how unforgiving local justice could be at that time. Actors pose as exhausted lodgers in a penny-hanging shelter for the early film The Great Train Robbery around 1903. Cheap flop houses sometimes offered only a rope to lean on for the night, a harsh setup later wrongly linked to the word hangover. A woman in traditional dress stands by a historic dome in Iran in the 1990s, her face and hands covered in flowing Persian script. An artist has written lines from bold Iranian women's love poetry on her skin, turning her body into a quiet protest about voice and freedom. Author and artist Dr. Seuss sketches the first version of The Grinch in 1957 for his new Christmas story. On the desk around him sit early drawings of Whoville characters that would soon become some of the most famous figures in children's books. Men sleep on wooden benches and floors in a sobering room attached to a Moscow police district in St. Petersburg in the 1910s. Russia opened its first such shelter in Tula in 1902, turning public intoxication from a street problem into something handled in special wards. A Vogue shoot in 1930 shows stacks of Louis Vuitton trunks already covered in the famous monogram canvas. Even then, the brand stood for luxury travel, with luggage that signaled wealth before a traveler even opened a case. Union auto workers hit an imported car with sledgehammers during a rally in the United States in the late 1970s. Their sign, reading, "If you sell in America, build in America," captured rising worries about foreign cars and lost factory jobs. Alfred Langevin shows his strange talent of blowing cigarette smoke out through his eye in the mid-1900s. A rare passage between his sinuses and tear duct let him push the smoke from his mouth to his eye, stunning everyone who saw it. A German Ju-87 dive bomber strikes a tower and sheds parts as it pulls out too late from a low attack run in the early 1940s. The image freezes the split second when extreme dive tactics turned from fearsome weapon to deadly risk for its own crew. Pakistani women throw their headscarves into a street fire during a protest in 1983. They are demonstrating against General Zia-ul-Haq's new dress rules and strict laws, turning a symbol of modesty into a symbol of resistance. A U.S. Navy sailor sprints across the tarmac at Kaneohe Bay Naval Air Station as smoke pours from burning seaplanes during the surprise air raid on Hawaii in December 1941. This base on the far side of Oahu was struck minutes before the better-known attack on Pearl Harbor. Children practice front crawl while strapped to a rotating overhead frame in an indoor pool in the early 20th century. The swimming merry-go-round let instructors keep beginners moving in circles without fear of them sinking. Makeup artist Jack Pierce builds Boris Karloff's famous square head and pale skin for the 1931 film Frankenstein. The look took hours of cotton, gum, and paint each day and became the classic face of the movie creature for decades. An Australian police officer poses in 1880 wearing the homemade metal armor taken from famous outlaw Ned Kelly. The heavy suit, hammered from farm plows, could stop revolver shots but was so clumsy it helped the police finally capture him. French knife sharpeners lie on their stomachs overturning grindstones in a dim workshop in the early 1900s. The rooms were so cold and damp that small dogs were kept on the benches to sit on the men's feet and keep them warm while they worked. A Yamabushi Buddhist monk stands in full armor and layered robes in Japan in 1895, pointing as if leading others forward. These mountain ascetic monks trained in both prayer and combat, serving as rare figures who bridged temple life and the world of samurai. These small Japanese inro cases from the Edo period held medicines and tiny personal items when kimonos had no pockets. They hung from the belt with carved toggles, turning everyday storage into a piece of wearable art. After the First World War, workers gather thousands of captured German helmets spread across a field like stones. Many of these steel shells were later melted down or even used as fill beneath new roads, turning battlefield gear into everyday infrastructure. Baseball legend Babe Ruth lies unconscious beside the wall after slamming into it while chasing a deep fly ball on 5 July 1924. He woke up minutes later, stayed in the game, and still collected 2 hits as the crowd watched in disbelief. Corrie ten Boom stands beside the false wall in her Harlem home that hid Jewish families and resistance fighters during the German occupation in World War II. After surviving a camp, she told the story in her book, The Hiding Place, and this small room later became a museum of quiet courage. Algerian resistance courier Zulika Uday sits handcuffed to a military truck after capture by French forces in 1957. 10 days later, she disappeared from custody, and her remains were found only decades later, making her a lasting symbol of quiet defiance. German pharmacist Julius Neubronner holds a carrier pigeon and one of his tiny chest-mounted cameras in the early 1900s. His flying photographers captured some of the first low-level aerial city views long before planes and drones became common. In 1908, a space object exploded in the air over Siberia, knocking down millions of trees across more than 800 square miles near the Tunguska River. No crater was ever found, so this remains the largest mysterious airburst from space in recorded history. American B-24 bombers roar low over burning oil fields at Ploiesti, Romania on 1 August 1943. The raid, called Operation Tidal Wave, hit key fuel plants, but cost the crews some of the heaviest losses of any single Allied air mission. Performers from colonized lands pose with elephants at a European amusement park in the early 20th century, part of a so-called human zoo show. Visitors paid to watch them live and perform inside fake, native villages, treating real people as exotic exhibits rather than guests. 2 stuntmen shake hands on the Warner Brothers lot in 1975, with one man fully set on fire for Pink Floyd's Wish You Were Here album cover. A sudden wind change singed the stuntman's eyebrows and mustache, so they had to repeat the risky shot to get this eerie image. Engineer Roy Wensley poses with Televox, a cardboard front robot built by Westinghouse in the late 1920s to take phone calls and switch machines on and off. It was one of the first public robot helpers, controlled by simple telephone tones long before digital computers. In the 1950s, health workers in Borneo had the Royal Air Force drop cats by parachute after pesticides removed most local cats and rats overran villages. The mission, later called Operation Cat Drop, became a famous example of how one fix for disease can cause surprising new problems in nature. Chief Ivan Papanin climbs out of the snow shelter of North Pole 1, the first Soviet drifting ice station, in 1938. For 9 months, his tiny team lived on a moving ice floe, taking measurements that opened a new era of polar exploration. Members of the Knights of the Tiger Eyes pose in strange hooded cloaks, an anti-Klan group formed to mock the famous White Hooded Order in the early 20th century. By turning the costume into parody, they tried to weaken the real group's image and mystery. In Victorian London, toshers crawled through dark city sewers at night, searching for lost coins, jewelry, and scrap metal. Their risky treasure hunts paid better than many factory jobs, but sewer exploring was banned in 1840, pushing the trade underground. German Foreign Minister Joachim von Ribbentrop speaks in Berlin in June 1941, announcing that his country has begun fighting the Soviet Union. His words opened Operation Barbarossa, the largest land invasion in history, with millions of soldiers moving east in a single campaign. French infantry rushed forward at the Marne in September 1914, trying to stop German troops only miles from Paris. Their stand forced the enemy to pull back and turned the fast-moving war into years of trench stalemate. Drawers are filled with rows of glass prosthetic eyes in 1938, each one painted by hand to match a real iris. Craftsmen used sets like this to fit people, including many injured in wars and accidents, with a natural-looking replacement eye. Harry Houdini hangs upside down above his glass escape tank in 1910, moments before being lowered in and locked. This stunt, later called the Chinese water escape, became his most famous act and inspired stage magicians for decades. A cobalt therapy machine rotates around a patient in 1955, firing focused radiation beams at deep disease spots doctors could not reach with surgery. This early device was a giant step toward modern precision treatment used in hospitals today. Walter Lunger, age 17, rests in a hospital in Innsbruck, Austria, in 1934 after an explosive device planted by Nazi militants injured him and cost him his right hand. He became an early civilian victim of the political violence that spread across Central Europe before the larger conflict. A young sailor turns his head to admire a woman on the dock while her partner walks ahead in uniform, creating a scene that looks just like the modern distracted boyfriend meme. A massive cloud rises over homes in Sungai Buloh, Malaysia, as a firework factory explodes on 7 May 1991. The blast claimed 26 lives, injured more than 100 people, destroyed about 200 houses, and shattered windows up to 15 kilometers away. Workers demonstrate old lifting gear in a beerstone quarry where soft underground rock was cut into huge blocks. For centuries, stone from caves like this was shipped by river to build churches, halls, and other grand public buildings. Coal stokers of the steamship Black Gang shovel fuel into roaring furnaces deep below deck in the early 1900s, their skin and clothes permanently coated in dust. Men like Arthur Priest worked in heat so intense that many labored shirtless for hours just to keep the ship moving across the ocean. In 1910, this prison baseball team played under a shocking deal. Their death sentences were postponed as long as they kept winning games. Each victory bought them a little more time, turning every inning into a fight for their future. A sea of people in Paris cheers as Charles Lindbergh's tiny Spirit of St. Louis glides in after his non-stop solo flight from New York in May 1927. He had just spent 33.5 hours alone over the Atlantic, winning the Orteig Prize and becoming aviation's first global superstar. Princess Diana sits in the back seat with bodyguard Trevor Rees-Jones and driver Henri Paul in Paris, just minutes before the car accident in 1997. This brief, casual snapshot turned into one of the last images of a public figure whose loss stunned the entire world. This World War I-era cover of Popular Mechanics shows a wild idea. Soldiers crawling toward trenches inside tiny rolling steel shields. The gadget looked futuristic on paper, but stayed mostly a fantasy of early war tech. Deep beneath Nacre, Mexico, these selenite crystals grew undisturbed for roughly 500,000 years, some stretching up to 11 meters and weighing around 55 tons. The cave is so hot and humid that explorers can only stay inside for minutes at a time in special suits. In 1925, Colorado rancher Catherine Rattlesnake Kate Slaughterback reportedly fought off a migrating swarm of rattlesnakes using just 3 bullets and a no-hunting sign. She later strung the snakes into this eerie display, turning a near disaster into frontier legend. During the 1936 Winter Games in Garmisch-Partenkirchen, German leader Adolf Hitler leans from the stands to sign programs for members of the Canadian figure skating team. The Olympic rings beneath him show how a global sports festival was quietly turned into a stage for his regime's image campaign. A patient stands restrained in a straitjacket as barred window shadows fall across the brick wall of a locked ward. Such restraints were routine in mid-20th century psychiatric institutions before modern care standards sharply restricted their use. Spanish Republican militia pose with an improvised catapult-style grenade launcher during the siege of Oviedo in the summer of 1936. With almost no heavy weapons, many Civil War units built strange homemade artillery like this to hurl explosives over city defenses. Marilyn Monroe tries out an anti-aircraft gun aboard the USS Benham during a troop entertainment visit, June 19, 1951. For many sailors on deck, it was the first time their pin-up idol suddenly appeared as a real person sitting at a live naval weapon. In 1994, a French theme park opened the Bamboula Village, where African performers were made to live and dance in a staged traditional settlement for tourists. Public outrage over the exhibit, condemned as a modern human zoo. Soviet troops crawl behind a light machine gun as infantry rushes forward near Riga during the Baltic Offensive, October 1944. Within weeks, this push helped trap German Army Group North in the Courland Pocket and ended large-scale fighting in Latvia. Early aviators sometimes landed right beside roads, so this early 1920s biplane managed to collide with a car in what's often cited as one of the first car-plane crashes. Mechanics and onlookers immediately swarmed the tangled machines. Australian trick shot star Joe Kirkwood Sr. lines up to drive a ball from his assistant's mouth during a publicity stunt in the 1930s. Crowds flocked to these nerve-wracking golf exhibitions, where precision swings doubled as live circus acts. Guests in scuba gear watch Jane Russell's new film, Underwater, from benches sunk beneath the surface, breathing through hoses as the movie plays above them. The 1955 premiere turned a simple screening into a full underwater spectacle, complete with bubble-filled theater aisles. Sophia Loren grips the wheel as her car is swarmed by overexcited fans at the Rome-San Remo Rally, April 9, 1956. The cracked windshield shows how wild mid-century celebrity mania could get in Italy. Sideshow performer Martin Lorello, nicknamed the Human Owl, could twist his head an incredible 180 degrees while keeping his body facing forward. His contortion act stunned early 1900 circus crowds who swore they were watching a real-life owl in human form. Officials in Sweden reveal the group stage board for the 1958 FIFA World Cup, listing teams like West Germany, Argentina, Brazil, and England. In this calm studio moment, the path was set for 17-year-old Pelé's breakout tournament and Brazil's first world title. Crowds fill central Prague for a state funeral in 1945, standing beside long rows of coffins for those killed in an American air raid. The bombing was the result of a navigational error that sent U.S. bombers over the Czech capital instead of their intended target in Germany. A French couple rides a wooden carrier tricycle through a city street in wartime France, 1940, turning it into their own mini delivery van. With petrol strictly rationed and many cars taken for military use, thousands of civilians relied on cargo bikes like this to move goods, children, A British worker throws a cheeky two-finger V sign at the camera in 1901, decades before the gesture was rebranded as a symbol of peace. Historians consider this the earliest filmed V sign, freezing a split second of working-class attitude at the dawn of cinema. Union soldiers and two young camp helpers pose in the woods during the American Civil War, 1860s United States. The North's 1865 victory kept the country united and dismantled the South's system of human bondage. Had the Confederacy won, America's borders and basic rights for millions would look radically different today. The overcrowded steamboat Sultana departs the Mississippi in April 1865, crammed with Union soldiers finally heading home from war. Hours later, its boilers burst near Memphis, and about 1,800 people were lost. From the 1950s to the 1970s, the CIA ran MK-Ultra, a covert program that secretly gave people LSD to see if their minds could be controlled. Most records were deliberately destroyed in 1973, so today investigators piece the story together from scraps of documents. Polish authorities tear down a Ukrainian Orthodox church in eastern Poland in 1938 during a state campaign to replace Orthodox sites with Catholic ones. In that single summer, over 100 Orthodox churches across the region were closed, converted, or demolished. Volunteers of the Women's Army Auxiliary Corps stand in a practice trench in France, 1917, learning to work just behind the front lines. They were the first women officially enrolled in the British Army, freeing thousands of men for combat roles. A U.S. border guard speaks with Mexican civilians through a barbed wire fence in the desert, 1920s. The quiet scene captures the early years of formal border control between the two countries, decades before today's massive enforcement system. U.S. agents dump seized liquor as barrels of illegal booze are emptied straight into the streets during Prohibition. Behind the scenes, industrial alcohol was laced with harsh chemicals in an attempt to deter bootleggers, a tainted policy that quietly harmed thousands. Inventor Sylvester H. Roper poses with his experimental steam velocipede, a coal-fired bicycle that many historians consider the first true motorcycle. He collapsed while demonstrating it at racing speed in 1896, leaving experts still debating whether his fall or his failing heart came first. Police seize bystander Ferdinand Baer in the chaos after the attack on Archduke Franz Ferdinand in Sarajevo, 1914. The real gunman, Gavrilo Princip, was arrested nearby moments later, and the shots he fired helped ignite World War I. Women at the Douglas factory in Long Beach assemble B-17 Flying Fortress bombers in October 1942, stepping into industrial roles left vacant by men at war. Their work helped mass-produce the planes that carried Allied air power across Europe and the Pacific. This experimental tunnel-boring machine from 1896 chewed through rock with a rotating steel face instead of picks and shovels. It was a clanking ancestor of the giant TBMs that now dig subway lines and undersea tunnels worldwide. Workers in hyperinflation-struck Berlin haul their wages home in laundry baskets because a single paycheck now comes as stacks of nearly worthless banknotes. At the peak of 1923, prices were rising so fast that some shops weighed cash instead of counting it. Reykjavik, 1943. Amid World War II troops on leave, one man in a trench coat appears to be holding something to his ear that looks uncannily like a modern cell phone. Historians think it was probably just a cigarette or small radio, but the photo still fuels time travel conspiracy theories today. Norwegian commandos on skis haul explosives through the snow toward the Vemork heavy water plant in Norway, February 1943. Their sabotage crippled Germany's wartime atomic program and helped keep the first nuclear bomb out of Hitler's hands. U.S. troops head toward Okinawa in amphibious craft as a battleship behind them fires a massive broadside, April 1, 1945. The landing opened an 82-day island battle involving 1,500 ships and over 500,000 Allied personnel, the largest amphibious assault of the Pacific War. Workers pose 4 at a time in the custom oversized bathtub built for incoming U.S. President William Howard Taft, 1909. The extra-large tub was so big it could comfortably fit all of them, proving it ready for installation in the White House. Stunt performer Alvin Shipwreck. Kelly reads a paper while perched on a flagpole, New York City, 1924. His daredevil pole-sitting marathons, sometimes lasting weeks, sparked a nationwide craze for living high above the streets. Retired railway workers with disabilities operate a water pump at a special home in what is now Belarus, 1901. Many had lost limbs on the job, so they used long-handled ladles and wheeled supports to keep working and earning a living. Child and adult laborers stand outside the Sloss Sheffield Steel and Iron Company in Jefferson County, Alabama, 1910. Many of these boys worked long shifts in mines and furnaces, covered in grime before they were even teenagers. American officers watch an experimental Caterpillar trench-crossing tank prototype rumble over rough ground in the late 1910s, just before the U.S. entered World War I. Engineers hoped machines like this would break the stalemate of trenches and barbed wire. Early WWI pilots sometimes fired .45 caliber M1911 pistols from open cockpits before machine guns became standard. This unusual brass-catching cage kept the hot casings from rolling under the rudder pedals and jamming the controls. Sergeant Stubby, a stray dog adopted by U.S. troops in WWI, learned to warn them of poison gas and incoming shells in the trenches of France. He served 18 months, joined 17 engagements, and became one of America's most decorated military dogs. Staff Sergeant Reckless, a small Mongolian mare of the U.S. Marines, hauled artillery shells across Korean battlefields and once made 51 solo trips in a single day under fire. She later received multiple medals, becoming the most decorated American warhorse in history. RAF Homing Pigeon. Gustav carried the first Allied report from the Normandy landings, flying over 150 miles in just 5 hours. His tiny message capsule confirmed to Britain that the massive seaborne assault on German-occupied France was underway and succeeding. Madrid's Telefonica building, then the tallest skyscraper in Europe, is hit during an air raid in the Spanish Civil War. This early communications hub became a constant target because foreign journalists and military signal units worked inside. Flames and smoke rise from a burning hangar on Ford Island after the surprise attack on Pearl Harbor, 7 December 1941. Japan's raid devastated battleships, but missed carriers and fuel tanks, pulling the U.S. into World War II instead of knocking it out. Workers drill through solid rock inside a vertical shaft for the Snowy Mountains hydroelectric scheme in Australia, 1950s. Over 100,000 migrants and locals would carve more than 200 kilometers of tunnels here to bend rivers and light the country. Jedburgh commandos from the American OSS and British SOE pose with Sten guns and rifles in rural France, 1944. Dropped in before D-Day, these small teams trained local resistance and cut German communications to paralyze defenses for the invasion. Italian soldiers drill in full gas masks on the Alpine front in 1916, ready for attacks that could sweep trenches without warning. Their insect-like gear turned them into anonymous silhouettes, a new face of industrial warfare in World War I. A British Churchill heavy tank fitted with cage-style screens to keep enemy magnetic mines from sticking to its armor around 1945. Crews improvised these wire skirts late in WW as a cheap, lightweight upgrade against close-range anti-tank attacks. Finnish soldiers in Viborg, 1941, take a break from the front line to play harmonicas among the ruins. In many units, pocket instruments like this were as standard as mess kits, used to keep morale alive between bombardments. A Japanese naval officer hands over his sword to an American soldier during the surrender of the Kurihara Naval Base on Honshu, 1945. Scenes like this quietly marked the final dismantling of Imperial Japan's once dominant navy. Vladimir Lenin poses as a grim factory worker named Ivanov in 1917, hiding in plain sight from the Tsarist police. Within months, this anonymous laborer would be leading a new government that reshaped the entire Russian Empire. Soviet Il-2 attack aircraft skimmed past a shattered bridge in central Berlin in May 1945, days after the city's surrender. Each Il-2 carried rockets and heavy cannon that earned it the nickname Flying Tank among crews and enemies alike. French soldiers of the 279th Infantry Regiment crouch in a mountain trench in 1915, their faces wrapped in improvised cloth visors with tiny viewing slits. The strange masks were meant to shield them from blinding light, flying splinters, and icy wind on the exposed ridge. This 1933 Soviet tram pass officially registers a German Shepherd as a service dog passenger, complete with its own ID photo. The handler had to buy separate tickets for both himself and the dog, which was allowed to ride on the front platform in its harness. Union prisoners of war line up for their meager food rations inside the overcrowded Andersonville prison camp, Georgia, 1864. More than 45,000 Union soldiers were held here, and nearly a third never left the camp alive. Young women of Whitechapel gather on a narrow East End street as news of the Jack the Ripper case spreads, c. 1888. In these crowded slums, poverty kept many on the streets at night, even while an unknown attacker was targeting local women. Japanese soldiers paused beneath a colossal reclining Buddha during the occupation of Burma, September 1942. The serene smile towering over them makes the entire army look miniature, as if history itself were being quietly watched from above. Luigi Lucchini, the Italian anarchist who fatally attacked Empress Elizabeth of Austria, Sisi, in Geneva in 1898, walks between guards after his arrest. His simple file, sharpened on a stone, abruptly ended the life of one of Europe's most famous royal figures. The ruined shell of reactor number 4 at the Chernobyl nuclear power plant looms behind hastily built barriers in May 1986, just weeks after the accident. Engineers were already planning the huge concrete sarcophagus that would seal the damaged unit for decades. Soviet tankers sprint to their KV-1 heavy tank dug in off Moskovsky Prospect during the siege of Leningrad in 1942. The massive vehicle served as a concrete bunker on tracks, guarding the city's southern approach under constant artillery fire. An aerial view of the Oha oil field on Sakhalin in the 1930s shows a forest of derricks stitched together by pipelines and tracks. This remote Soviet outpost was pumping crude straight out of the island's marshes long before offshore rigs arrived. A seemingly endless column of German prisoners of war snakes along a ruined Soviet road in 1944. By this stage of the Eastern Front, entire units were surrendering as Germany's army collapsed under constant offensives. The prototype Concorde 001 sits caught in a giant braking net after its first high-speed taxi test in Toulouse, September 18, 1968. Less than 6 months later, it would make its maiden flight and soon join the race for commercial supersonic travel. 18-year-old French resistance fighter Simone Seguin stands with her submachine gun in newly liberated Chartres, August 1944. She took part in ambushes and street fighting during the liberation of Chartres and Paris. Dutch showman Piet van der Zwaard sits behind the wheel of his car in 1955 when newspapers billed him as the heaviest man in Europe at about 455 pounds, 206 kilos. Press photos like this turned his daily life into a traveling attraction, drawing curious crowds across the Netherlands. In 1964, Australian javelin thrower Reg Spears squeezed into this 5'4" 2.5-foot crate and had himself air freighted from London to Perth to get home without buying a ticket. The 2.5-day journey left him wedged in darkness with only canned food, a blanket, and a flashlight. Sailors of the Union gunboat USS Hunchback crowd the deck in Virginia as the Civil War nears its end, posing with banjos, chains, and worn uniforms. Unlike the segregated Army, the U.S. Navy mixed black and white sailors in the same crew, making ships like this some of the most integrated workplaces of 1860s America. In 1922, 12-year-old waterboy Hussein Abdul Rasul stubbed his toe on a stone step while playing near Howard Carter's camp in the Valley of the Kings. That buried step turned out to be the hidden entrance stairway leading down to the tomb of Pharaoh Tutankhamun. The winged Victory of Samothrace is winched back up the Daru staircase at the Louvre in Paris after World War II. The 2nd century BC masterpiece had spent the conflict hidden in a French chateau, one of hundreds of treasures secretly evacuated to keep them safe. Silent film superstars Mary Pickford and Douglas Fairbanks pressed their hands into wet cement at Grauman's Chinese Theater in Hollywood, 1927. Their playful stunt accidentally launched the now legendary handprint tradition for movie idols around the world. Hollywood crews in the 1920s built this fake New York street, complete with stoops, cobblestones, and an elevated train looming overhead. Before location shooting was common, entire East Coast neighborhoods were carefully faked just a few miles from the Pacific. Workers watch as the original plaster and wood Palace of Fine Arts in San Francisco is carefully demolished in the 1960s. The beloved 1915 Expo Monument was then rebuilt in steel and concrete, creating the lasting landmark visitors see today. President Harry Truman grins from the rear platform of his campaign train as he hoists the Chicago Daily Tribune's infamous "Dewey Defeats Truman" headline, November 1948. The paper had already gone to print, but Truman's surprise victory turned this front page into the most famous miscall in U.S. election history. Marie Curie drives one of her Little Curie mobile X-ray vans to the Western Front during World War I. These rolling radiology labs scanned thousands of wounded soldiers, helping surgeons find bullets and save limbs instead of amputating them. On March 13, 1956, Alcatraz inmates queued for a menu of grilled frankfurters, parsley potatoes, sauerkraut, buttered carrots, and banana pudding. The island prison kept food quality relatively high because officials believed decent meals cut down on tension and escape attempts. 2 street boys sit in wooden stocks beside a bearded constable in Victorian London, 1872. Public restraints like these were used to shame petty offenders in front of the neighborhood. Miss Unsafe Brakes poses in a skeleton print suit at a 1939 U.S. road safety pageant, warning drivers what bad brakes could mean. In the 1930s, American companies loved these odd-themed contests, using glamorous title holders to promote everything from tires to canned food. X-ray of a Chinese woman's bound feet, once praised as golden lotuses. For centuries, some girls' feet were tightly wrapped so they stayed around 7 centimeters long, with the toes folded under the sole. Inmates at Alcatraz sculpted this fake head from soap, toilet paper, toothpaste, cement dust, and real hair to fool night counts in 1962. It was left on the pillow during their legendary escape attempt from the island prison. George and Willie Muse were African-American albino brothers displayed in early 1900s U.S. circuses under exotic stage names. Taken from their Virginia home as children, they spent years touring the country before finally regaining control of their own lives. In 1907, a woman nicknamed Serious Sue offered a $1,000 reward to anyone who could make her laugh, an enormous sum at the time. Because of a facial nerve condition, she couldn't smile at all, so the prize was never claimed. A veiled Udmurt bride covered in silver coins is led by her future husband's sister to the river in rural Udmurtia, 1930. According to tradition, the women performed this water-dousing ritual without the groom present, washing the bride for luck and protection before the wedding. In November 1990, boxing legend Muhammad Ali flew to Baghdad to personally meet Saddam Hussein. Using his fame and quiet diplomacy, he secured the release of 15 detained American citizens just weeks before the air campaign began. An American traveler relaxes while local children braid her hair in an Afghan village in 1969. The scene captures a quiet moment of curiosity and friendship in Afghanistan before decades of dramatic change. A baboon named Corporal Jackie served in the South African Army in WWI as the official mascot of the 3rd Transvaal Regiment, complete with uniform, rations, and pay. At night he stood sentry, shrieking to warn soldiers whenever he sensed movement from nearby enemy lines. Betty Broadbent, the most famous tattooed lady of the circus era, shows off her full-body artwork to a sailor on a New York stage in the 1930s. She wore more than 560 tattoos and later entered the 1939 New York World's Fair beauty pageant as its first heavily tattooed contestant. A Parisian woman in stockings warms herself by a tiny attic stove, Paris, c. 1950, captured by photographer Tora Johnson. Post-war apartments were often poorly heated, so residents relied on small coal stoves that barely softened the city's damp winter cold. Soviet geologists haul massive mountain sheep horns down a rocky slope in the Pamirs, Tajik SSR, 1975. Specimens like these helped scientists study how high-altitude wildlife adapted to thin air and harsh climate. This iron tongue puller was a punishment tool used in earlier centuries to control people who spoke forbidden words. With one hard pull, it could badly injure the tongue and end a person's public voice for life. ChatGPT Skazal, firefighters in Texas City battle ablaze aboard the French ship Grand Camp on 16 April 1947, minutes before disaster. The ammonium nitrate cargo soon caused one of the largest man-made blasts in history, and almost none of the people seen here survived. In 1955, the small ship Joyita vanished on a routine trip in the Pacific, and 5 weeks later it was found drifting with radios broken, clocks stopped, and medical supplies scattered on deck. Its 25 people, lifeboats, and most of the cargo were gone without a sign. Oak Island in Nova Scotia has drawn treasure hunters for over 200 years, with stories of hidden gold, the Holy Grail, and secret papers buried under smart traps. Every modern attempt with drills, pumps, and bulldozers ends the same way, as tunnels flood and walls fall in. In 1872, London, 10-year-old George Davy was photographed in Wandsworth Prison after being sentenced to a month of hard labor for taking just 2 rabbits. His tired eyes show how strict laws of Victorian England treated poor children almost like adults. In 1987, beloved children's host Fred Rogers brought his puppets to a Baltimore hospital room to comfort 7-year-old Beth Asher as she recovered from brain surgery for epilepsy. He spoke softly with her and let the puppets visit. In 1922, at a New York State psychiatric hospital, patients took part in early dance therapy sessions where waltzes and simple steps replaced silent locked rooms. Doctors were beginning to see that music and movement could calm fear, lift mood. In 1932, doctors tested heart and lung strength by asking patients to blow into a tube and hold a tall mercury column steady while their blood pressure was taken. These early lab experiments helped show how breathing, blood flow, and stress are connected, paving the way for modern fitness and heart checkups. At the 1924 Paris Games, star swimmers Johnny Weissmuller and Duke Kahanamoku relaxed together between races, already legends in the pool. Weissmuller would later become famous as Tarzan in Hollywood films, while Kahanamoku helped spread surfing around the world. On April 30, 1952, Mr. Potato Head became the first toy ever advertised directly to children on television. The simple plastic face pieces that kids stuck into real potatoes launched a new era of kids marketing and turned this odd little character into a pop culture icon. In the early 1950s, some toy makers sold home atomic labs like this one, letting kids use a Geiger counter on real pieces of uranium ore at the kitchen table. These kits were designed to spark love for science during the atomic age. During the dance marathon craze of the 1930s, exhausted couples tried to win prize money by staying on their feet for days, snatching a few minutes of sleep on cots while the crowd watched like a strange live show. In the early 1900s, inventors Jan Szczepanik and Kazimierz Zeglin showed off a new silk vest by letting an officer fire at it while a volunteer calmly stood in front of the crowd. Within a few years, stronger weapons made silk protection outdated. In the early 1900s, photographer Lewis Hines secretly entered mills and factories, sometimes posing as a repairman or Bible seller, to capture images of tired children working long hours. In 1940, British soldiers marched past the Great Pyramids in Egypt as North Africa became a key front of the Second World War. The sharp lines of the modern troops moving between 4,000-year-old stone giants made history feel like it was looping in the same desert corridor. Around the end of the 19th century, photographers made hidden mother portraits by covering mothers with dark cloth so they could secretly hold their children still during long exposure times. The result was family photos where calm children sit in front while a strange covered figure fades into the background. On May 8, 1902, Mount Pelée erupted with such force that a hot cloud of ash and gas swept through St. Pierre and destroyed almost the whole city in minutes. The only known survivor in the city, a jailed worker named Ludger Silberus, lived because he was locked in a thick stone cell with tiny air holes. In 1942, Chinese sailor Poon Lim survived after his ship went down in the South Atlantic, escaping alone onto a small wooden raft with only a few tins of water and biscuits. For 133 days, he caught rain, fish, and even seabirds with tools he made himself. In October 1944, after Allied forces freed the city of Liège in Belgium, members of the German secret police were held in cells inside the old citadel. Their stunned faces show how quickly power can flip, as men who once gave orders now waited to be questioned about the rule they had enforced. In 1940s China, many children like these lived on the streets. After years of war and upheaval broke families apart. They slept in doorways, shared worn-out clothes, and relied on small acts of kindness or odd jobs to get through each day. On July 28, 1945, a B-25 bomber lost in thick fog struck the 79th floor of the Empire State Building, smashing through offices and sending one engine out the far side. Elevator operator Betty Oliver amazingly survived a 75-story fall when the cable snapped, and the skyscraper reopened for business less than 2 days after the crash. In 1936, former Florida Police Chief A.L. Burton arrived in Gainesville to face trial after investigators said he had carried out a deadly attack and blamed a nearby black man. The officer, once praised as a hero, suddenly became proof that quiet, careful investigations could uncover abuses of power people had trusted for years.